Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news is, you're alive. The bad news is, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. You're not just poor though. You're property. You can't leave this village without written permission from your lord, can't marry without his approval, and can't even die without your family paying him a fee. Modern unpaid interns have better working conditions and more legal rights than you do. This isn't just poverty. It's systematic oppression with a subscription fee you can never cancel. But before you get comfortable, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The church bell clangs at dawn, which is your cue to stumble out into the freezing morning air and begin another day of unpaid labor. 3 days a week, sometimes more, belong entirely to your lord. Not your family, not your own survival, but to the guy who owns the land you're tied to, like a human fence post. The corvée system is medieval capitalism at its most honest. Your lord needs his fields plowed, his grain harvested, and his roads maintained. So guess who's doing it for free? You are, along with every other serf in the village, trudging out to work land that will never belong to you, growing food you'll never eat, building wealth you'll never see. The three-field system sounds organized until you realize it means your back is permanently bent at a 45-degree angle. One field lies fallow, one grows winter crops, one grows spring crops, and you rotate between them like a human plow horse. Your hands develop calluses on top of calluses until they look like tree bark. Your shoulders ache from swinging a scythe that weighs more than a modern lawnmower and cuts about as efficiently as a butter knife. There are no weekends in medieval times. The concept of Saturday and Sunday off won't be invented for another few centuries. Your only breaks are religious feast days, which you're usually too exhausted to enjoy anyway. Christmas means you get to collapse in church instead of collapsing in a field. What a treat. Planting season is when things get really fun. 6-day work weeks become the norm because your lord's crops take priority over your own. While you're breaking your back in his fields, your own measly plot sits unattended. Your family's food security takes a back seat to his profit margins. It's like having a boss who schedules you for overtime during your own wedding. Your free time, and I use that term loosely, gets filled with delightful activities like road maintenance, ditch digging, and bridge repair. The medieval equivalent of community service, except you never committed a crime. Well, unless being born poor counts as a crime, which in this system it basically does. The bailiff makes sure you're not slacking off. Think of him as a medieval middle manager with a stick and the authority to fine you for breathing wrong. He tracks your attendance, monitors your work quality, and reports back to the lord about who's not pulling their weight. Privacy doesn't exist when your productivity directly affects someone else's bank account. You can't call in sick because sickness isn't recognized as a valid excuse for missing work. Plague? Show up anyway. Broken leg? Hop to the fields. The only acceptable excuse for missing corvée labor is being dead, and even then, your family has to pay a fine for the inconvenience. Speaking of things that drain your soul while barely keeping it functioning, let's talk about what passes for food in your medieval paradise. Your culinary journey begins and ends with pottage, a watery stew that's basically medieval sad desk lunch served 3 times a day for the rest of your life. It's made from whatever grains you can scrape together, oats, barley, rye, boiled in water until it reaches the consistency of thick soup and the flavor of disappointment. Sometimes you throw in a turnip if you're feeling fancy. This is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, every day, forever. The bread on your table makes modern whole grain look like cake. Medieval rye bread is so dense and hard you could use it as a building material. It's dark, coarse, and often mixed with whatever cheap fillers are available, peas, beans, even sawdust when times get really tough. The wealthy eat white bread made from wheat, but you'll never see wheat bread unless you're baking it for your lord's table. Your bread is black, heavy, and requires serious jaw muscles to consume. You wash this feast down with small beer because water will literally kill you. Medieval sanitation makes modern gas station bathrooms look sterile. Rivers are sewers, wells are contaminated, and boiling water for safety hasn't caught on yet. So, you drink weak beer for breakfast, weak beer for lunch, and weak beer for dinner. It's safer than water and provides just enough alcohol to make your miserable existence slightly more tolerable. Protein is a luxury reserved for special occasions. Like not dying of starvation. You might see meat a few times a year. Maybe some bacon at Christmas if you're lucky, or a scrawny chicken if one of yours stops laying eggs. Fish is theoretically available, but fishing rights belong to the Lord, so you can't just walk down to the river and catch dinner. Eggs are precious commodities, often saved to pay taxes rather than eaten. Your vegetables come from whatever you can grow in your small plot and store through winter. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, onions get buried in dirt cellars that make everything taste like soil. Cabbage gets fermented into sauerkraut, which sounds sophisticated until you realize it's just rotten cabbage that won't kill you. Fresh vegetables exist only during growing season, which lasts about 4 months if you're lucky. The contrast between your table and your lord's table is like comparing a food bank to a 5-star restaurant. While you're gnawing on black bread and watery pottage, he's enjoying roasted meats, white bread, imported spices, and wine. His table features multiple courses, exotic dishes, and enough variety to make your head spin. Your table features whatever didn't rot in storage. Spices are completely out of your price range. Salt is expensive enough that it's often used as currency. Pepper costs more than silver. Your food is seasoned with whatever herbs you can forage, if you can find them and if they don't belong to the Lord's forest. Flavor is a privilege of the wealthy. Milk comes from your own animals if you're lucky enough to own any, but most of it gets turned into cheese for storage. Fresh milk spoils quickly without refrigeration, so you drink it immediately or lose it. Cheese lasts longer but tastes like it was aged in a cave, which it probably was. Your cooking equipment consists of 1 pot, maybe 2 if you're doing well. You cook over an open fire that fills your house with smoke and makes everything taste like charcoal. Temperature control means moving the pot closer to or farther from the flames. Timing is guesswork. Every meal is either burnt or undercooked. Feast days offer slightly better food, but you're usually too exhausted from working extra hours to prepare for the feast to actually enjoy it. The irony is perfect. You work harder to celebrate having slightly less terrible food. If the monotonous food doesn't kill your spirit, the fees you pay for every aspect of existence definitely will. Now, let's talk about the real genius of medieval oppression, the fee system. Every single aspect of your existence comes with a price tag, and you can't opt out because you're literally trapped in this economic nightmare. First up is the merchant, which is basically paying your lord for permission to get married. That's right, is less by the privilege of finding love. Assuming love is even possible when you smell like a barnyard and own nothing but the lice in your hair. But here's the kicker. You can only marry someone your lord approves of. So you're paying for the right to marry from a pre-selected menu of equally miserable people. It's like a dating app where you pay the subscription fee but the app owner picks all your matches. The Harriot is perhaps the most insulting fee of all. It's a death tax. When you die, your family has to give your lord your best animal or most valuable possession. So, not only do you work your entire life for someone else's benefit, but when you finally escape through death, your family gets robbed on your way out. Your cow, your ox, your best tool, whatever might help your family survive without you goes straight to the Lord's collection. It's like paying a convenience fee for dying. Then there's the tithe, where the church demands 10% of everything you produce. God apparently needs your turnips more than your starving children do. Every grain of wheat, every egg, every vegetable you manage to grow gets counted, and 1/10 disappears into the church's coffers. The priests explain this is for your spiritual welfare, which is generous of them to worry about your soul while your body slowly starves. The mill fees are particularly cruel because they create an artificial monopoly. You're legally required to grind your grain at the Lord's mill, and naturally, he charges whatever he wants for this mandatory service. You can't build your own mill, you can't go to a competitor's mill, you can't even grind grain by hand without facing penalties. It's like being forced to shop at one overpriced grocery store for the rest of your life, except the grocery store owner also owns your house and your job. Court fees add insult to injury by making you pay for the privilege of being judged by the same person who's oppressing you. When you get dragged to manorial court for letting your pig wander or missing a day of corvée labor, you have to pay court costs on top of whatever fine they impose. You're literally paying for your own persecution. The Lord sits as judge in his own court, hearing cases about his own rules, and you pay him for the experience. Baking fees prove that no aspect of survival is too basic to monetize. You can't bake bread in your own home without paying to use the Lord's oven. The Lord owns the only legal oven in the village, so every loaf of bread comes with a service charge. It's like having to pay your landlord every time you want to cook dinner in your own kitchen. Except your landlord also controls your work schedule and marriage prospects. Marriage approval fees go beyond the merchant. There are additional charges for processing your request, investigating your chosen partner's suitability, and documenting the arrangement. Getting married requires navigating a bureaucracy that would make modern government offices look efficient. Each step costs money you don't have, creating debt before your marriage even begins. Land transfer fees apply even though you don't actually own any land. If you want to pass your tenancy to your children, that costs money. If you want to swap plots with another serf, that costs money. If you want to add a small garden behind your hovel, that costs money. Every minor adjustment to your living situation requires the Lord's permission and payment. Moving fees exist even though you're not supposed to be able to move. If you somehow get permission to relocate to another manor, you pay an exit fee to your current lord and an entrance fee to your new one. It's like paying cancellation charges on a cell phone contract, except the contract is your entire existence and the penalties follow you wherever you go. Even attending church comes with fees during special occasions. Want your baby baptized? Fee. Want to get buried in consecrated ground? Fee. Want the priest to bless your marriage? Additional fee on top of all the other marriage fees. The beauty of this system is that the fees are designed to keep you perpetually in debt. Just when you think you might save enough to improve your situation, another fee appears. It's a medieval subscription service you can never cancel, with automatic renewals and penalty charges that ensure you'll never escape. All these fees buy you the luxury of returning each night to your magnificent palace. Your palace awaits, and by palace, I mean a one-room hovel that makes modern studio apartments look like mansions. You share this architectural marvel with your spouse, your children, your animals, and a thriving ecosystem of rats, fleas, and various other creatures that have claimed squatters' rights in your living space. The floor is dirt, not hardwood that looks like dirt, not tile designed to resemble earth tones, actual dirt that turns into mud every time it rains. And it rains a lot in medieval Europe, which means your floor is basically a swamp for half the year. You walk around in ankle-deep sludge that smells like a combination of animal waste, rotting food, and human despair. When it dries out, it becomes dust that gets into everything you own, which admittedly isn't much. Your roof is made of thatch, basically grass and straw woven together and held in place by hope and prayer. It leaks constantly, turning your dirt floor into that lovely mud I mentioned. During storms, you huddle in the driest corner and listen to water dripping through your ceiling like nature's own torture device. The thatch also provides excellent housing for mice, birds, and insects that occasionally fall through onto your dinner table. There's no chimney, because chimney technology is still being perfected by people much wealthier than you. Instead, you have a fire pit in the middle of your single room, and the smoke just fills the entire space before eventually finding its way out through gaps in the roof. Your lungs are slowly being pickled by constant smoke exposure. Everyone in your family has a permanent cough that sounds like a dying goose. Your eyes water constantly, and everything you own smells like a campfire that's been burning wet wood for decades. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for another 500 years. Your entire family sleeps in the same bed, which is really just a pile of straw covered by whatever fabric you can scrounge together. When I say entire family, I mean parents, children, grandparents if they're still alive, and possibly a cousin or two who couldn't find anywhere else to go. Personal space doesn't exist when you're all huddled together for warmth in a room that's barely larger than a modern walk-in closet. The animals live with you because they're too valuable to leave outside where they might freeze, get stolen, or eaten by wolves. Your pig sleeps 3 feet from your head. Your chickens roost on whatever furniture you have, which means everything is covered in bird droppings. If you're lucky enough to own a cow or goat, it gets the prime real estate near the door, because nothing says home sweet home like stepping over a large farm animal to get to your bed. Speaking of furniture, you have a table, maybe a stool or two, and that's about it. Everything is handmade from whatever wood you can find, which means it's rough, unstable, and likely to give you splinters. Your dishes are wooden bowls and clay pots that crack in winter and smell like whatever you last cooked in them. Utensils are basically just knives, and everyone shares everything because individual place settings are a luxury you can't afford. Storage consists of baskets, sacks, and holes dug into your dirt floor. Your winter food supply lives in underground pits that stay cool but also attract rodents and insects. Everything you own smells like damp earth and slowly rotting vegetation. Your clothes hang on pegs driven into the walls, assuming your walls are sturdy enough to support pegs, which they probably aren't. The smell in your home is indescribable, but I'll try anyway. Imagine a barn mixed with a medieval bathroom. Add some rotting food, unwashed bodies, animal waste, smoke, and wet straw. Then multiply that by 10 and let it ferment for several months. That's your daily aromatherapy experience. You can't escape it because you live in it, work in it, eat in it, and sleep in it. The smell follows you everywhere because it's literally embedded in your clothes, your hair, and your skin. Winter means making an impossible choice between freezing to death or suffocating on smoke. You can build up the fire to stay warm, but that means filling your tiny space with even more toxic fumes. Or you can let the fire die down and risk hypothermia while listening to your children's teeth chatter all night long. Either way, you're miserable. And either way, you wake up feeling like you've been hit by a medieval truck. Lighting comes from the fire or maybe a candle if you can afford one, which you probably can't. Candles are expensive, and you need to save every penny for the endless parade of fees your lord demands. So, when the sun goes down, your world goes dark except for the flickering flames that cast eerie shadows on your smoke-stained walls. Water comes from whatever well or stream is closest, assuming it hasn't been contaminated by your neighbor's waste or dead animals. You haul it back to your house in whatever containers you can find, and you use it sparingly because hauling water is back-breaking work that cuts into your already limited free time. Even your legal system is designed to keep you trapped in this aromatic paradise. The manorial court system is where justice goes to die, and you get to pay for the privilege of watching it happen. Your lord serves as judge, jury, and primary beneficiary of every legal proceeding, which creates about as much fairness as you'd expect from a system where the person oppressing you also gets to decide whether the oppression was legal. Court sessions happen regularly, and attendance is mandatory. Miss court, and you get fined. Show up to court, and you'll probably get fined for something else. It's a no-win situation that generates revenue for your lord while reminding everyone exactly who's in charge around here. The beauty of manorial justice is its simplicity. Your lord makes the rules, interprets the rules, and profits from enforcing the rules. There's no appeals process, no higher court to petition, and definitely no constitutional rights to protect you. The Lord's word is literally law, and his law is designed to extract maximum profit from minimum effort. Petty offenses carry hefty penalties that keep you perpetually in debt. Let your pig wander into the Lord's garden? That's a fine. Fail to attend corvée labor because you're sick? Fine. Speak disrespectfully to the bailiff? Fine. Breathe too loudly during court proceedings? Probably also a fine. The goal isn't justice. It's revenue generation disguised as law enforcement. Your testimony is worth less than a freeman's, which means even when you're telling the truth, your word carries no weight against anyone with higher social status. If a freeman accuses you of stealing his chicken, your denial means nothing. You're guilty until proven innocent, and proving innocence requires evidence you're not allowed to present, or witnesses who won't risk their own necks to help you. The fines are carefully calculated to be painful but not impossible to pay, because a dead serf generates no revenue. They take just enough to hurt without killing you, ensuring you'll be back next month for another round of medieval justice. It's a sustainable business model that keeps the court system profitable while maintaining the illusion of law and order. This entire system was designed to be inescapable, a perfectly crafted trap that ensures you'll never climb out of the hole you were born into. So, there you have it. Serfdom in all its systematic glory. This wasn't just bad luck or temporary hardship. This was a carefully engineered system designed to trap you and your descendants in perpetual servitude while extracting maximum value from your misery. Social mobility was a fairy tale told by people who'd never lived in a dirt-floored hovel. You were born a serf, you died a serf, and your children inherited both your legal status and your debts. The system was specifically designed to prevent escape through any means except death, and even then your family paid fees for the inconvenience of your departure. There was no retirement plan except working until your body gave out completely. No pension, no savings account, no golden years of relaxation. You worked until you literally couldn't work anymore, then you became a burden on your family until you died, and they had to surrender your best possession to the Lord as a parting gift. Your children started their lives already trapped in the same cycle that destroyed you. They inherited your legal obligations, your debt, your tiny plot of land, and your complete lack of options. Generation after generation of your family would live and die in the same village, working the same fields, paying the same fees, sleeping in the same smoke-filled hovels. The beautiful irony is that this system lasted for centuries because it worked exactly as intended. It created a stable supply of desperate labor while generating steady revenue for the ruling class. So, sleep well tonight, knowing you dodged this particular historical bullet. Your worst Monday morning meeting has nothing on waking up as medieval property with a subscription fee you can never cancel. You are Sir Geoffrey, a knight of the realm with a horse, a sword, and a newly discovered medical condition. The good news is you're still technically nobility. The bad news is your fingers are going numb and there's a suspicious patch of skin on your arm that doesn't hurt when you pinch it. Medieval society has a simple solution for your problem: exile, shame, and social death. Your family will disown you, your friends will flee, and church bells will ring for your funeral while you're still breathing. But there's one last option for knights like you. Join the only military order that accepts the living dead. Meet the Order of St. Lazarus, where chivalry meets quarantine and holy warriors fight with bodies that are literally falling apart. Medieval leprosy starts quietly, like a polite houseguest who gradually reveals they're planning to burn your home down. First, you notice small patches of skin that feel nothing when touched. Your sword hand grows clumsy during practice. What you assume is fatigue from too many tournaments is actually your body declaring war on itself in slow motion. The moment of diagnosis transforms you from respected knight to untouchable outcast overnight. One day you're Sir Joffrey, landowner and warrior. The next, you're a walking corpse who must announce his presence with a bell so decent people can flee. Medieval understanding of leprosy was straightforward. God was punishing you for your sins. The disease wasn't just destroying your body, it was proof of your spiritual corruption. The immediate social consequences arrive faster than the physical symptoms. Your family disowns you because association with a leper brings shame to the bloodline. Your friends vanish because leprosy was considered contagious through mere proximity. The church rings funeral bells for you while you stand listening, legally dead but inconveniently still breathing. Your property gets seized, your name erased from family records, and your existence becomes a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to misbehaving children. Medieval law treated lepers as the walking dead. You couldn't inherit property, make contracts, or testify in court. You were required to wear distinctive clothing, usually a gray or black robe with a hood, and carry a bell or clapper to warn others of your approach. You couldn't enter churches, markets, or taverns. You couldn't touch common water sources or handle food that others might consume. Even speaking to healthy people required maintaining a specific distance, usually 6 feet, which medieval people measured as the length of a long staff. The physical isolation was matched by spiritual exile. The church taught that lepers were living embodiments of sin, their rotting flesh a preview of hell's torments. Some theologians argue that lepers had already begun their punishment in this life, which made them both pitied and feared. Others claim that suffering from leprosy could purify the soul, but this cold comfort offered little practical help when you're watching your fingers literally fall off. Your choices as a newly diagnosed leper knight were grim. You could wander the countryside as a beggar, living in forests and caves, slowly starving as your body deteriorated. You could join a regular leper colony, but these were typically populated by peasants and merchants who had no understanding of knightly honor or military discipline. The daily routine involved managing weeping sores, begging for scraps, and waiting to die while trying to maintain some shred of human dignity. But there was one alternative that preserved a twisted version of your former status. The Order of St. Lazarus accepted knights with leprosy, transforming your medical curse into a religious calling. Instead of dying alone in exile, you could join a brotherhood of warriors who understood both the code of chivalry and the reality of rotting flesh. The irony was perfect. You became a holy warrior precisely because you were considered damned. The order offered something no other institution would provide to a leper: purpose. While your body fell apart, your skills with sword and horse remained valuable. Your military training didn't disappear with your sense of touch. Your knowledge of tactics and siege warfare was unaffected by the spreading numbness in your extremities. The Order of St. Lazarus recognized that a knight with leprosy was still a knight, just one fighting a war on 2 fronts, against the enemies of Christendom and against his own failing body. This wasn't charity or pity, This was medieval society's most practical solution to an impossible problem: what to do with trained killers who happened to be slowly dying of an incurable disease. The Order of Saint Lazarus was founded in Jerusalem during the Crusades as both military order and leper hospital, which sounds like the setup to history's darkest joke. Founded around 1130, it began as a hospitaller order caring for lepers in the Holy Land, then gradually evolved into something unprecedented: a military organization whose admission requirements were being a knight and having leprosy. Medieval society's ultimate contradiction, wrapped in a green Maltese cross. The admission process was refreshingly straightforward. Step 1. Prove you're a knight with proper training and noble blood. Step 2. Prove you have leprosy with visible symptoms and medical confirmation. Step 3. Take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, while your body slowly disintegrates. Most military orders required physical perfection. The Lazarists required physical decay. It was the only institution in medieval Europe where rotting flesh was a qualification rather than a disqualification. The green Maltese cross on their mantles announced your condition from a comfortable distance. While other military orders wore white crosses or red crosses that symbolized purity and martyrdom, the Lazarists chose green, the color of decay, of things growing in dark places, of hope struggling against inevitable death. The cross was both a badge of honor and warning label, identifying you as a holy warrior who happened to be contagious. Daily life in a lazaretto combined monastic routine with medical necessity and military discipline. You woke before dawn for prayers, assuming you could still grip a prayer book. Breakfast was communal, though eating required creativity when you couldn't feel your fingers or had lost them entirely. The morning meal typically consisted of bread soaked in wine or broth, foods that required minimal chewing for brothers whose faces were deteriorating. Managing wounds became a communal activity. Brothers helped each other change bandages, clean suppurating sores, and apply whatever treatments medieval medicine offered. The infirmary was the busiest building in any Lazarist house, constantly filled with men treating symptoms that would never improve. They shared techniques for wrapping stumps, protecting exposed bone, and maintaining dignity while your body betrayed you in increasingly creative ways. The hierarchy problem was uniquely challenging. How do you maintain military discipline when your sergeants are literally falling apart? The order developed practical solutions. Commands were given through horn calls and hand signals for brothers who'd lost hearing or sight. Written orders accommodated those who could no longer speak clearly. Leadership rotated among members based on current physical capability rather than rigid seniority, because the brother who commanded yesterday might be bedridden today. Rules and regulations were written for men who might lose fingers mid-battle. Equipment modifications included special sword grips for hands missing digits, modified stirrups for feet with limited sensation, and armor designed to protect areas where leprosy had left exposed bone. The Order's armorer became expert at creating functional gear for bodies that no longer functioned normally. Training continued despite physical limitations. Sword work adapted to accommodate reduced grip strength and limited finger mobility. Horsemanship training emphasized leg control for knights who couldn't reliably feel the reins. Battle tactics incorporated the reality that some brothers might collapse mid-fight, not from enemy action but from disease progression. They developed formations that could function even when members suddenly became combat ineffective. The patron saint Lazarus provided perfect irony, worshipping resurrection when you're the living dead. Lazarus of Bethany, raised from the dead by Christ, became the symbol for men who existed in the space between life and death. The Order's members prayed daily to a saint who had experienced death and returned to life, while they experienced the opposite, a gradual dying that never quite reached completion. Brotherhood forged through shared suffering and social rejection created bonds stronger than blood. These men understood each other's daily reality in ways no healthy person could comprehend. They shared the experience of watching their bodies betray them, of being rejected by families, of facing death in slow motion while maintaining warriors' pride. The camaraderie was born from mutual understanding of a uniquely horrible situation. The order's houses became refuges where men could maintain dignity while falling apart. Here, missing fingers didn't disqualify you from leadership. Facial disfigurement didn't exclude you from brotherhood. Progressive blindness didn't end your military career. The Order of St. Lazarus created space in medieval society for warriors who remained dangerous despite being considered already dead. This was medieval Europe's strangest military organization. Knights whose bodies were failing but whose spirits remained unbroken. Holy warriors fighting battles against earthly enemies while losing a longer war against their own flesh. Brothers, united by shared decay and unshakable determination, to serve God even as their bodies served as warnings of mortality's inevitable victory. The psychological warfare of facing an enemy who has nothing left to lose cannot be overstated. Imagine you're a Saracen warrior charging across the battlefield at Montgisard in 1177, scimitar raised, confident in your training and faith. Then you see your opponent, a knight in green-crossed surcoat, whose left hand is missing 2 fingers, whose face bears the telltale lesions of advanced leprosy, and who's spurring his warhorse toward you with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely doesn't care if he dies today. This is psychological warfare at its most disturbing. The Battle of Montgisard saw Leper knights fighting alongside Baldwin IV, the Leper King himself, in one of the Crusade's most unlikely victories. Contemporary accounts describe the terror of Muslim forces facing warriors who appeared to be animated corpses. One chronicler wrote that the Lazarists fought like men already dead, fearing nothing because they had nothing left to lose. When your enemy literally cannot feel pain in half his body and considers death a merciful release, conventional battlefield psychology breaks down completely. At the Battle of La Fourby in 1244, the Order of St. Lazarus fought in what became one of the Crusader state's most catastrophic defeats. The Leper Knights formed part of the rear guard, covering the retreat of healthier forces. Military logic was grimly practical. Use the men who were dying anyway to buy time for those who might survive. The Lazarists held their positions until overwhelmed, fighting to the end because retreat offered no meaningful advantage to men whose bodies were already surrendering to death. During the final siege of Acre in 1291, Leper Knights manned the walls alongside Templars and Hospitallers. Defenders reported that the Lazarists were particularly effective in close-quarters combat because enemy soldiers hesitated to engage warriors whose wounds might be contagious. Fear of contracting leprosy made Muslim attackers reluctant to grapple with Leper Knights, giving the deceased warriors a tactical advantage their healthy brothers lacked. Fighting alongside healthy crusaders created its own tensions. The Leper Knights ate separately, drank from their own water sources, and maintained physical distance even from allied forces. During the march to battle, they rode at the rear of the column to avoid contaminating others. In camp, they pitched their tents downwind from the main force. The practical isolation meant that Leper Knights developed exceptional unit cohesion. They had only each other to rely on. The tactical advantage of being literally untouchable to enemy forces extended beyond psychological impact. Muslim warriors, like their Christian counterparts, believed leprosy was contagious through contact. This meant that Leper Knights often found themselves facing enemies who fought defensively, trying to wound from distance rather than engage in the brutal close-quarters combat that medieval warfare typically demanded. A Leper Knight with a sword had a reach advantage over an enemy trying to maintain 6 feet of separation. Equipment modifications became necessary innovations. Swords were fitted with extended grips for hands missing fingers. Shields were lightened and rebalanced for arms with reduced strength. Armor was modified with additional padding to protect areas where leprosy had destroyed nerve endings. A knight who couldn't feel wounds might not notice he was bleeding to death. Horses were trained to respond to leg pressure alone, since riders might lose grip strength mid-battle. The strange respect earned through battlefield courage despite physical decay changed how other military orders viewed the Lazarists. Initially treated as contaminated outcasts, the Leper Knights proved their worth through consistent battlefield performance. Templars and Hospitallers learned to coordinate tactics with warriors whose bodies were failing but whose military skills remained sharp. Combat effectiveness mattered more than physical condition when facing overwhelming enemy numbers. Enemy accounts describe fighting the dead men walking with mixture of horror and grudging admiration. Muslim chroniclers noted that Leper Knights fought with unusual ferocity, showing neither mercy nor expectation of quarter. One account describes a Lazarus knight continuing to fight after losing his sword hand, using his shield as a weapon, until finally overwhelmed. These weren't desperate last stands. They were tactical choices made by men who understood that retreat offered no meaningful sanctuary. The ultimate warrior's paradox emerged. Leper Knights became most effective when closest to death. Advanced leprosy meant reduced pain sensation, allowing warriors to fight through injuries that would incapacitate healthy men. The psychological freedom of having nothing left to lose translated into tactical boldness that often surprised enemies expecting conventional military behavior. They were living weapons in the most literal sense, their bodies simultaneously failing and dangerous. The fall of the Crusader states marked the beginning of the end for the Leper Knights as a military force. After Acre's collapse in 1291, the Order of St. Lazarus retreated to Europe along with the other military orders, but their transition proved more difficult than most. Templars and Hospitallers could establish new purposes: banking, naval warfare, defending European frontiers. The Lazarists faced a unique problem. Their primary qualification was a disease that was becoming increasingly rare in medieval Europe. The transformation from military order to purely charitable organization happened gradually and without fanfare. European houses of St. Lazarus shifted focus from training warriors to caring for the sick. The green cross that once marked battlefield terror became a symbol of medical charity. Former Knight brothers became hospital administrators, their military expertise redirected toward managing leper colonies and medical facilities. The transition was practical rather than philosophical. These men understood suffering and institutional management because they lived both. By the 14th century, leprosy was declining across Europe due to improved nutrition, better hygiene, and possibly climate changes that reduced transmission. The order's recruitment pool literally disappeared as fewer knights contracted the disease that had been their admission requirement. Houses that once trained dozens of leper knights annually began accepting healthy brothers to maintain operations. The irony was complete. An order founded for deceased warriors survived by accepting healthy administrators. The gradual merger with other orders reflected medieval Europe's practical approach to institutional obsolescence. In 1489, Pope Innocent VIII attempted to merge the order with the Knights Hospitaller, recognizing that separate institutions for leper knights no longer served any meaningful purpose. The French branch resisted, maintaining independence until 1608 when it merged with the Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The Italian branch joined the Order of St. Maurice in 1572, creating hybrid organizations that preserved the name while abandoning the original mission. Modern successor organizations still exist today, though their connection to medieval leper knights is largely ceremonial. The Military and Hospitaller Order of St. Lazarus of Jerusalem continues charitable work, focusing on leprosy research and care for marginalized populations. These contemporary knights wear the same green cross their medieval predecessors bore into battle, but their warfare is against disease and poverty, rather than Saracen armies. The forgotten heroism of men who fought wars while fighting their own bodies deserves better remembrance than history has provided. These warriors faced two enemies simultaneously: external foes who wanted to kill them, and an internal disease that was already succeeding. They chose to serve God and Christendom, even when their own bodies had become evidence of divine displeasure. Their courage was measured not in victories won, but in battles fought despite having every excuse to surrender. The final irony remains. They're remembered more for their disease than their courage, defined by their medical condition rather than their military service, known as leper knights, rather than simply knights who happen to have leprosy. You know Switzerland. Precision watches that tick with the reliability of death and taxes. Numbered bank accounts hiding the world's secrets. Mountains so perfectly arranged they look like someone ordered them from a catalog. And a neutrality so legendary they've been sitting out every major conflict since Napoleon was having his midlife crisis across Europe. This is a country that won't even join military alliances. They've turned minding their own business into an art form, complete with secret bunkers and gold reserves that could fund small nations. When the world goes to war, Switzerland politely declines and offers to hold everyone's money instead. So imagine this perfectly organized, perpetually neutral machine deciding it wanted to run tropical plantations. Yes, Switzerland, the land of cuckoo clocks and careful bookkeeping, once thought they could manage an overseas empire. They looked at Britain's sprawling colonial network and France's imperial ambitions and thought, you know what? We could do that too. The sheer absurdity is breathtaking. A landlocked nation with no navy attempting to join the colonial scramble. It's like watching a librarian decide to become a pirate. Switzerland's brief imperial experiment lasted about as long as chocolate in a furnace. And the whole affair was so embarrassing they've spent the last century pretending it never happened. Tonight, we're going to explore how Swiss efficiency met tropical reality, why this colonial dream collapsed faster than a house of cards in an avalanche, and how the country famous for staying out of everyone else's business briefly tried to get into everyone else's business. The 19th century was Switzerland's industrial awakening. Textile mills were humming, watchmaking was booming, and Swiss banks were discovering the profitable art of managing other people's money. But there was a problem. All this industrial success required raw materials that Switzerland simply didn't have. Cotton for textiles, exotic goods for trade, and resources that existed everywhere except in their perfectly manicured alpine valleys. Meanwhile, Switzerland watched other European powers getting obscenely rich from colonial exploitation. Britain was strip mining India, France was busy civilizing half of Africa, and even tiny Belgium had carved out a personal kingdom in the Congo. The Swiss, with their characteristic pragmatism, looked at this global smash-and-grab operation and thought, we're missing out on some serious profit margins here. This wasn't romantic imperialism. There were no grand speeches about bringing civilization to distant lands or planting flags for national glory. This was cold, hard Swiss business logic. They needed cotton for their textile mills, they were tired of paying British middlemen inflated prices, and they had banks full of capital looking for profitable investment opportunities. The Swiss government, however, wanted absolutely nothing to do with colonies. Running an empire meant armies, navies, and the messy business of actually governing people thousands of miles away. That sounded expensive, complicated, and dangerously close to picking sides in international conflicts. So, private investors stepped up to handle the empire-building business themselves. Enter the brilliant minds behind this venture, Basel trading companies and Zurich investors who were convinced they could apply Swiss banking precision to colonial management. These weren't hardened imperialists or military adventurers. These were merchants and financiers who thought running a colony would be like opening a new branch office, just in a warmer climate with different accounting challenges. They needed a target, and Nueva Helvecia in Uruguay emerged as the practical choice. The name alone should have been a warning sign. Nueva Helvecia translates to New Helvetia, which sounds like something from a tourism brochure written by someone who'd never left Switzerland. But on paper, it looked perfect. Temperate climate, existing European presence, and a Uruguayan government so desperate for immigrants they were practically paying people to show up. The personnel selected for this venture were exactly what you'd expect from Switzerland: farmers who understood alpine agriculture, craftsmen who built things to last centuries, and merchants who assumed that Swiss organizational skills would translate perfectly to South American settlement management. They packed their precision, their work ethic, and their complete confidence that Swiss methods would work anywhere. The financial backing came from the usual suspects: Basel's trading elite, convinced they could turn colonial agriculture into the same kind of profitable, predictable enterprise as their European operations. Zurich investors who'd made fortunes in textiles and banking, now ready to apply that same methodical approach to plantation management. The fundamental miscalculation was treating colonization like any other Swiss business venture. They approached empire building with the same mindset they'd used to establish a new cheese cooperative or expand a watchmaking operation: careful planning, precise budgeting, and the absolute certainty that Swiss efficiency could overcome any obstacle. They were about to discover that tropical reality doesn't respond well to alpine organizational methods, and that colonial management requires skills that no amount of Swiss precision could provide. The journey itself was the first hint that Swiss precision might not translate well to colonial ventures. Swiss colonists arrived in Uruguay carrying European expectations and absolutely zero understanding of local conditions, weather patterns, or social structures. They stepped off ships expecting to find a slightly warmer version of Switzerland, complete with predictable seasons and cooperative locals who would appreciate their organizational skills. Instead, they found themselves in a place where the climate operated on completely different rules, where their carefully planned agricultural schedules meant nothing, and where the local population had their own ideas about how things should work. It was like showing up to run a marathon and discovering everyone else was playing rugby. The settlement of Nueva Helvetia became a masterclass in Swiss precision meeting South American reality. The colonists immediately set about trying to recreate alpine village life in an ecosystem that had never heard of Swiss efficiency. They built houses designed for alpine winters in a climate that laughed at their heating systems. They planted crops using farming techniques perfected for mountain valleys, only to watch them wither in soil that operated by completely different chemical rules. The agricultural disasters were spectacular in their thoroughness. Swiss farming techniques, developed over centuries in mountain valleys with predictable rainfall and soil conditions, proved utterly useless in Uruguayan terrain. Crops failed with the reliability of Swiss clockwork, but in reverse. Irrigation systems designed for alpine streams couldn't handle South American weather patterns. Seeds that had thrived for generations in Swiss soil simply gave up and died. The cultural clash was even more entertaining. Swiss Protestant work ethic collided head-on with local Catholic traditions, creating exactly the kind of tension the Swiss had hoped to avoid. The colonists expected cooperation and found confusion. They tried to impose their methodical approach to everything from worship schedules to market days, only to discover that the locals had been managing their own affairs quite successfully without Swiss input. You, as a Swiss administrator, are now trying to explain to local officials why your colonial governance structure requires 17 different forms to be filled out in triplicate before anyone can sell vegetables at the market. The locals are looking at you like you've suggested they reorganize the solar system for better efficiency. Meanwhile, other Swiss ventures were hemorrhaging money with impressive consistency. Trading posts in West Africa turned into expensive lessons in tropical disease management. Madagascar operations became elaborate ways to convert Swiss francs into mosquito food. Every colonial venture seemed designed to prove that Swiss business acumen worked perfectly well in Europe, but became completely useless the moment it crossed any significant body of water. The logistics nightmares were particularly Swiss in their precision-engineered failure. How do you supply colonies when you're landlocked? How do you manage finances across oceans with 19th century communication systems? How do you maintain Swiss efficiency standards when your supply chain involves ships, foreign ports, and weather patterns that don't respect Swiss scheduling? The bureaucratic comedy reached peak absurdity as Swiss administrators tried to impose alpine village governance structures on tropical settlements. They created detailed record-keeping systems for tracking their own failures. They filed precise reports documenting exactly how their carefully planned ventures were collapsing. They maintained meticulous accounts of money disappearing into colonial disasters, with the same attention to detail they'd use for successful cheese exports. Tropical diseases proved remarkably unimpressed by Swiss medical efficiency. Malaria didn't respond to careful scheduling. Yellow fever ignored Swiss organizational charts. The colonists discovered that precision medicine worked best when you actually understood the diseases you were trying to treat, and that alpine remedies were about as useful as snowshoes in a desert. The financial hemorrhaging became a spectacle of Swiss precision applied to losing money. Investors watched their carefully calculated returns transform into spectacular losses with mathematical precision. Colonies consumed capital like furnaces consuming firewood, but with less useful heat production. Every quarterly report documented new and creative ways to convert Swiss wealth into tropical disappointment. The inevitable abandonment came not with dramatic military defeats or heroic last stands, but with quiet accounting decisions. One by one, Swiss colonial ventures were simply filed under unprofitable ventures and liquidated with the same methodical approach used to establish them. No grand imperial collapse, no stirring speeches about honor and empire, just Swiss businessmen cutting their losses and moving on to more sensible investments. The whole operation lasted roughly as long as a chocolate bar left in direct sunlight. They didn't lose their colonies to native uprisings or rival European powers. They simply ran the numbers, realized they were hemorrhaging money with no prospect of profit, and quietly sold everything off to whoever would take it. By the time the dust settled, Switzerland had managed to prove that their legendary efficiency worked perfectly for banking, watchmaking, and cheese production, but was spectacularly unsuited for tropical empire management. They discovered that colonial success required skills that no amount of Swiss precision could provide: understanding local conditions, adapting to unfamiliar environments, and managing people who didn't share Swiss assumptions about how the world should work. The colonists packed up their precision instruments, their detailed record-keeping systems, and their wounded pride, and headed back to the mountains, where everything made sense again. The speed at which Switzerland erased this colonial embarrassment from national memory was itself a masterpiece of Swiss efficiency. Within a generation, the entire imperial experiment had been quietly filed away in the same mental cabinet where they kept other inconvenient historical footnotes. It was as if the whole thing had been a collective fever dream brought on by too much alpine air and overconfidence. Swiss historians approached this colonial chapter with the same meticulous attention to detail they applied to everything else, except in reverse. Instead of documenting every precise detail, they simply stopped mentioning it. The national narrative smoothly transitioned from Switzerland discovers industrial success directly to Switzerland becomes Europe's sensible neutral nation, skipping entirely over that awkward period when they thought they could manage tropical plantations. This wasn't accidental amnesia. This was deliberate, organized for getting executed with characteristic Swiss precision. The colonial failures actually reinforced Switzerland's growing preference for staying home and managing other people's money instead of trying to manage other people's territories. Every failed plantation, every hemorrhaging trading post, every bureaucratic disaster in some distant tropical location became evidence that Switzerland's true calling lay elsewhere. The lessons learned were typically Swiss in their practical clarity. Swiss business acumen worked perfectly well within Switzerland's borders, where everyone understood the rules, the climate behaved predictably, and centuries of cultural development had created systems that actually functioned. But colonial management required skills that Swiss precision couldn't provide: the ability to adapt to completely different environments, to work with people who had their own perfectly functional ways of doing things, and to accept that efficiency meant different things in different places. So, Switzerland quietly pivoted back to what they did best: banking, where precision actually mattered and where clients appreciated Swiss discretion; manufacturing, where their attention to detail created products that lasted centuries; diplomacy, where their neutrality became an asset rather than an obstacle. They discovered that staying out of other people's business wasn't just a political strategy, it was a competitive advantage. The historical erasure was so thorough that most Swiss citizens today would be genuinely surprised to learn their country ever attempted colonial ventures. The national mythology simply edited out the embarrassing imperial chapter, focusing instead on the far more successful story of industrialization, banking, innovation, and the gradual development of their famous neutrality. This selective memory wasn't dishonest. Exactly. It was more like strategic historical editing, keeping the parts of the story that reflected well on Swiss competence while quietly discarding the parts that suggested Swiss methods might not be universally applicable. The colonial failures became footnotes in academic papers rather than chapters in popular history books. The ironic legacy of Switzerland's colonial disasters was that they helped cement the country's reputation as Europe's most sensible nation. Every other European power was busy conquering, occupying, and eventually losing vast overseas territories in expensive, bloody imperial collapses. Switzerland tried it once, realized it was unprofitable and complicated, and went back to making watches and managing money. The ultimate Swiss lesson from their brief imperial experiment was beautifully simple. Sometimes the most profitable empire is the one you never build. While other European nations spent centuries conquering territories, fighting colonial wars, and eventually losing everything in expensive decolonization processes, Switzerland quietly focused on managing the wealth that actual empires generated. Modern Switzerland's global influence through financial services and international organizations represents everything their colonial ventures weren't: successful, profitable, and sustainable. They discovered that you don't need to plant flags in distant lands to exercise global power. You just need to be the place where everyone keeps their money and holds their peace conferences. The historical footnote of Nueva Helvetia still exists in Uruguay today, a quiet reminder of Switzerland's brief imperial moment. The town maintains Swiss architecture, celebrates Swiss holidays, and produces cheese using traditional Swiss methods. It's like a living museum of what might have been if Switzerland had possessed any talent whatsoever for colonial management. But the final irony is perfect in its Swiss precision. Switzerland achieved more lasting global influence by staying neutral and managing money than they ever could have through tropical plantations and trading posts. They became the world's banker, the host of international diplomacy, and the keeper of everyone else's secrets. Their empire became invisible but infinitely more powerful than any collection of colonial territories. The empire that never was became the influence that never ended. Switzerland learned that true power doesn't come from controlling distant lands, but from being indispensable to everyone who does. They turned their colonial failure into their greatest success story, proving once again that Swiss efficiency works best when applied to Swiss strengths rather than imperial fantasies. You're Alexander the Great, conqueror of the known world, but you're missing one crucial piece of paperwork: proof you're a god. So, naturally, you decide to drag your army 300 miles across the Libyan desert to visit a remote oracle. This is like a CEO flying halfway around the world just to get a single stamp on a form. The water is questionable, the sun wants to kill you, and your GPS is a flock of possibly delusional birds. So yes, this is history's most expensive validation quest. Now, you might wonder why the man who just steamrolled the Persian Empire would need a divine endorsement from some priests in the middle of nowhere. The answer is simple. Egypt wasn't just another conquest to add to his collection. Alexander wasn't just trying to rule Egypt, he was trying to rule it without constant rebellions, which meant playing by Egyptian rules. Egyptian pharaohs weren't just kings who happened to wear fancy hats, they were living gods, specifically sons of Amun-Ra, the chief deity of the Egyptian pantheon. This wasn't some ceremonial title you could fake your way through. The local priests were the gatekeepers who could make or break your divine resume, and they took their job seriously. Previous conquerors had learned this the hard way. The Persians, for instance, had ruled Egypt for nearly 2 centuries, but they'd made the critical error of ignoring Egyptian religious customs. They'd treated the temples like ATMs, looting sacred treasures, and showing zero respect for local traditions. The result? Constant uprisings, rebellions, and a population that viewed them as foreign oppressors rather than legitimate rulers. Alexander was smart enough to avoid this mistake. From the moment he'd entered Egypt, he'd been playing the part perfectly. In Memphis, he'd made all the right sacrifices, worn all the right ceremonial headgear, and performed the traditional pharaonic rituals with the enthusiasm of someone who really needed this job. He'd even restored temples that the Persians had neglected, which was the ancient equivalent of fixing the office coffee machine on your first day. But here's the thing about being a divine ruler. You can't just declare yourself a god and expect people to go along with it. You need credentials. You need someone with serious religious authority to vouch for you. And in the ancient world, there was no higher authority than the Oracle of Siwa. The Oracle of Siwa had what modern marketers would call brand recognition. This wasn't some backwater fortune teller operating out of a tent. This was the most famous oracle in the ancient world, with a reputation that stretched from Libya to Greece. Even the Greeks, who were notoriously snobbish about foreign religions, respected the Oracle of Siwa. They'd conveniently decided that the Egyptian god Amun was actually their own Zeus in disguise, calling him Zeus Amun, which was the ancient equivalent of rebranding. The oracle's client list read like a who's who of ancient celebrities. The fabulously wealthy King Croesus had consulted it. The poet Pindar had dedicated statues to it. Even Athenian generals had sought its guidance before major campaigns. If you wanted divine legitimacy in the ancient Mediterranean, the Oracle of Siwa was the gold standard. For Alexander, this wasn't about spiritual curiosity or some mystical quest for enlightenment. This was pure politics. He needed a priest of Amun to officially recognize him as the son of their god, which would make him the legitimate pharaoh of Egypt in the eyes of his new subjects. Without this endorsement, he'd always be seen as just another foreign conqueror with a really good army. The problem was that the Oracle of Siwa wasn't exactly convenient to reach. It sat in the middle of the Libyan desert, 300 miles from the nearest civilized outpost, surrounded by some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Getting there would require crossing a wasteland where water was scarce, the temperature could kill you, and previous armies had simply vanished without a trace. But Alexander had already come this far. He'd conquered most of the known world, founded cities, and defeated enemies that had seemed impossible to beat. Surely a little desert hiking wouldn't be that difficult. After all, what could possibly go wrong with a 300-mile detour through one of the most dangerous environments on the planet? The route to Siwa was a masterclass in things that will kill you in the desert. You're looking at 300 miles of sand that reaches temperatures hot enough to literally cook an egg. Assuming you had any eggs left after the first week of this nightmare, your water supply is whatever you can carry on your back, and there are no convenience stores for the next 3 centuries of walking. To put this in perspective, the Persian king Cambyses had tried this exact same journey about 2 centuries earlier with 50,000 men. They all vanished without a trace, not got lost and wandered around for a while. Vanished, completely disappeared, swallowed by the desert like it was hungry. The only reason we know they existed at all is because Herodotus wrote about it, and even he seemed baffled by the whole thing. But Alexander, in his infinite wisdom, decided this was definitely the kind of challenge that would end differently for him. Because apparently when you've conquered the known world, basic geography becomes optional. So here you are, trudging through sand that shifts under your feet with every step. Your sandals, designed for Mediterranean terrain, are about as useful as paper umbrellas in a hurricane. The leather straps dig into your blistered feet, and sand works its way into every crevice of your equipment. Your shield, once polished to a mirror shine, is now coated with a layer of grit that makes it look like it's been through a sandstorm, which, coincidentally, it has. The sun isn't just hot, it's personally offended by your existence. By mid-morning, the metal fittings on your armor are too hot to touch. Your helmet becomes a portable oven that slow cooks your brain. The water in your skin tastes like leather and disappointment, and you're rationing it like it's liquid gold, because in this wasteland, it basically is. Your fellow soldiers are having what could generously be called second thoughts about this whole expedition. These are men who've marched across continents, fought in battles that made grown enemies weep, and followed Alexander through seemingly impossible campaigns. But trudging through an endless sea of sand while their leader chases what might be a mirage is testing even their legendary loyalty. The conversations around the evening campfires have shifted from tales of glory to quiet questions about whether Alexander has finally lost his mind. Someone mentions that maybe they should have stayed in Memphis, where there were actual buildings and beer that didn't taste like sand. Another soldier points out that they could be conquering more of Persia right now instead of slowly dying in the middle of nowhere for a conversation with a priest. But the real fun starts when the weather decides to get involved. Desert storms in this region don't just bring wind, they bring walls of sand that can bury entire armies. The sky turns the color of dried blood, and suddenly you can't see your own feet, let alone the man marching next to you. The sand gets into your eyes, your mouth, your nose, making every breath feel like you're drowning in grit. This is when the ancient sources start getting creative with their explanations. According to the historians, divine intervention began showing up right on schedule. Plutarch claims there were helpful rain showers that appeared just when the army needed them most. Arrian mentions guide animals, either snakes or ravens depending on which account you believe, that showed up to lead the way when everyone got hopelessly lost. Now, the miraculous rain was probably just the kind of freak weather that occasionally happens in deserts, the sort of thing that keeps meteorologists employed. As for the guiding snakes and ravens, well, when you've been walking through a furnace for weeks and your water ration consists of warm backwash, you start seeing all kinds of helpful wildlife. More likely, these were either heat-induced hallucinations or the ancient equivalent of spin control. Some scout probably spotted a distant oasis, and by the time the story got back to the historians, it had transformed into divine ravens, personally dispatched by Zeus Ammon to guide the Chosen One. The desert doesn't care that you conquered Persia, or that you're supposedly descended from Achilles. It's an equal opportunity killer that has swallowed armies, caravans, and the occasional overconfident king without breaking a sweat. Every step forward is a gamble that this isn't just an elaborate way to commit suicide by geography, but somehow, against all odds and basic common sense, Alexander's army keeps moving forward. Maybe it's loyalty, maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe it's the terrifying realization that turning back means crossing the same hellish wasteland they just survived. Either way, they're committed now to this expensive desert detour in pursuit of a two-word endorsement from a priest who may or may not actually have a direct line to the gods. After days of endless sand and questionable life choices, Siwa Oasis appears like something from a fever dream. One moment you're staring at another horizon of nothing but beige death, and the next you're looking at an impossibly green pocket of civilization that shouldn't exist. Palm trees rise from the desert floor like nature's middle finger to geography and actual water. Not the mirage kind that's been taunting you for weeks. Sparkles in natural springs. The contrast is so jarring it almost seems fake, like someone built a resort in the middle of hell just to mess with travelers. After the monotonous brutality of the desert, the sudden explosion of green feels like your eyes are playing tricks on you. Date palms tower overhead, their fronds rustling in a breeze that actually feels cool for the first time in weeks. Springs bubble up from underground sources, creating pools of water so clear you can see the bottom. The temple itself sits on a rocky outcrop overlooking this oasis paradise, and it's exactly what you'd expect from ancient Egypt's premier tourist trap. The priests have been running this operation for centuries, and they know exactly what visitors want to hear. This isn't some humble shrine maintained by a single hermit. This is a full-service religious experience with professional staff who've seen every type of desperate ruler, ambitious general, and wealthy merchant looking for divine validation. The Temple of Amun is built from local limestone, weathered by centuries of desert winds, but still imposing enough to make visitors feel appropriately small. Hieroglyphs cover the walls, most of them proclaiming the greatness of Amun and the wisdom of consulting his oracle. The architecture is distinctly Egyptian, but with local touches that reflect the oasis's isolation from the Nile Valley. It's less grand than the temples of Memphis or Thebes, but it has something they lack: exclusivity. You can't just wander in here on a weekend trip. Alexander approaches the temple with the kind of nervous energy you'd expect from someone who's just risked his entire army for a conversation. He's cleaned up as much as possible, trading his desert-stained traveling gear for something more appropriate for meeting a god. His companions follow at a respectful distance, probably wondering if this whole expedition was worth it just to watch their leader have a chat with a priest. The inner sanctum is exactly what you'd expect from a place that's been hosting divine consultations for centuries. Dark, humid, and thick with a smell of incense mixed with what could charitably be called centuries of religious activity. The air is heavy and close after the dry desert heat, making everything feel dreamlike and otherworldly. Flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the whole atmosphere is designed to make visitors feel like they're somewhere between the mortal and divine worlds. The chief priest emerges to greet the famous conqueror, and here's where things get interesting from a linguistic perspective. The priest speaks Egyptian, which Alexander definitely doesn't understand. Alexander speaks Greek and some Persian, which the priest probably doesn't understand. This leaves them dependent on translators, which in the ancient world was always a recipe for creative interpretation. The priest, following standard protocol, greets Alexander with the traditional pharaonic salutation, Mene Semen, son of the god. This is exactly what any priest would say to any pharaoh or potential pharaoh. It's not a divine revelation. It's basically the ancient Egyptian equivalent of Your Majesty. But somewhere between the priest's mouth and Alexander's ears, this routine greeting gets transformed into something much more significant. Either the translator messes up the translation, or Alexander hears exactly what he wants to hear, or both. What should have been a standard welcome son of the god becomes, you are the son of Zeus Ammon, destined to rule the world. It's like a game of ancient telephone where the message gets more dramatic with each retelling. Alexander asks his burning questions, probably something about whether he's truly divine, whether his father Philip's murderers have been properly punished, and whether he's destined to conquer the world. The oracle provides suitably vague positive responses, the kind of answers that could mean anything depending on how you interpret them. Your father's death has been avenged could refer to the god's justice. Or it could mean that the murderers will eventually get what's coming to them, or it could just be a polite way of saying, sure, whatever you want to believe. The whole consultation probably lasts about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of vague pleasantries and carefully worded prophecies that could apply to almost anyone with sufficient ambition. This is what Alexander has risked his army for, what he spent weeks crossing a deadly desert to achieve. A brief conversation with a priest who gives him exactly the answers he was hoping to hear. The oracle essentially hands Alexander the divine equivalent of a participation trophy. Congratulations, you're definitely a god. You're absolutely destined for greatness, and all your enemies will be defeated. It's the kind of prophecy that sounds impressive but commits to nothing specific. If Alexander conquers the world, the oracle was right. If he fails, well, the gods work in mysterious ways. Alexander leaves the temple, convinced he's just received the most important prophecy in history. The priest probably goes back to his regular duties, having successfully handled another ambitious ruler looking for divine endorsement. The whole thing is so routine that it barely registers as unusual. Just another day at the office for ancient Egypt's most successful religious tourism operation. Alexander returns to civilization with his shiny new divine credentials and immediately starts acting like someone who's just been personally endorsed by the gods. The change in his behavior is noticeable enough that his companions start exchanging worried glances. This is the same man who used to share meals with his soldiers and listen to their concerns, but now he's demanding proskynesis, the Persian custom of prostrating yourself before royalty like they're actual deities. His Macedonian companions are horrified by this development. Greeks and Macedonians have a long tradition of not bowing to anyone except actual gods, and even then, they prefer to keep their dignity intact. The idea of getting down on their hands and knees before their former drinking buddy strikes them as both ridiculous and vaguely insulting. These are men who've fought alongside Alexander in dozens of battles, who've saved his life and had their lives saved by him in return. Now he wants them to worship him? The desert trip becomes the foundation of Alexander's divine mythology. Every coin minted after Siwa shows Alexander sporting ram's horns, the symbol of Zeus Ammon, just in case anyone missed the point about his new divine status. These aren't subtle hints. They're basically ancient billboards announcing, "I talk to a god, and he says, I'm his son." The irony is that all this risk, all those potentially dead soldiers, all that time spent crossing a wasteland that had swallowed entire armies, was for a two-word endorsement that eventually drives his closest friends away. The very divine status that was supposed to legitimize his rule ends up alienating the people who made that rule possible in the first place. But here's the thing about Alexander. He was always a master of marketing. The real miracle wasn't the oracle's prophecy or the divine guidance through the desert. The real miracle was Alexander's ability to turn an expensive and dangerous detour into the cornerstone of his legend. He took a routine consultation with a priest and transformed it into proof of his divine nature. The legacy of Siwa isn't really about what the oracle actually said. It's about how effectively Alexander sold the story. He understood that perception is reality, especially when you're trying to rule an empire that spans 3 continents. The trip to Siwa gave him something invaluable, a divine origin story that justified his increasingly autocratic behavior and his claims to rule over peoples who had never heard of Macedonia. In the end, the Oracle of Siwa delivered exactly what Alexander needed, just not in the way anyone expected. He got his divine endorsement, his subjects got a pharaoh they could accept, and history got one of its most enduring myths about the thin line between ambition and madness.